Hi everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we'll go ahead and look into how we can install Terraform. Now the overall installation process of Terraform is very simple. All you'll have to do is you need to download the single binary file associated with the Terraform and use it in your workstation. So you can get the latest Terraform binary over the official HashiCorp website. Download that specific binary to your workstation, and that's about it. That's the only thing that is required to do. Now, one of the great things about Terraform is that it supports multiple platforms, so it can work perfectly well in Windows, Mac OS, Linux, FreeBSD, Solaris, etc. So if you look into the official download page of Terraform, so you have terraform.io/downloads, you will get an option of operating system for you to choose. So depending upon the operating system that you choose, you can go ahead and download the binary file easily. Now in Windows, you have the option of binary. For Linux and Mac OS, it is way simpler. So all you can also do, because package manager is available, you can directly run these two set of commands and everything is done for you. All right. So this is one option for Mac OS and Linux. And if you want to go the binary way, you can also download the binary as well. And same goes for Linux. You have the option to run commands and you also have the binary based installation. So in today's video, what we'll be doing, we'll be taking up the example of Windows and how we can set up Terraform in Windows. And in the next video, we'll go ahead and look into how the installation process of Linux would look like. And the similar would also apply to Mac OS. So within here, you have two options. You have the 386 and the AMD 64. So we'll be using the AMD 64 one. Let's go ahead and click here. And here you see a zip file is being downloaded for us. So let's open up the zip file. Within the zip file, you have a terraform.exe. Let's go ahead and extract it and we'll extract it to desktop. Alright, so within desktop, here you will see that we have a terraform.exe that is available. So from Windows, let's open up the command prompt. And within here, you can go to the desktop directory. And within here, you can run the Terraform here and you'll see you basically get the set of options that you can use. Now, this is the only thing that is required as far as the Terraform is concerned. Now, before we conclude, one important thing here. In fact, let's look into it. Let me create a new folder. Let's call it as kplabs-terraform. Now from the CLI, let's quickly switch to the kplabs terraform folder, and if we run terraform from here, you see it states terraform is not a recognized command. So basically, one of the challenges in this type of setup is that if you want to run terraform, you have to go to the desktop, because this terraform.exe is part of the desktop. If you switch to any other folder other than desktop, you will get this specific error. Now we do not really want that, because we don't want to switch every time to desktop when we want to run Terraform. So we want things to work globally, and this is the reason why we also have to set up the environment variable in Windows. So this is not really only applicable for Terraform. So if you go ahead and download any other product, setting an environment variable is very important in Windows. So in order to set up the environment variable, what you'll need to do in my computer, you can go ahead and open up the properties. Now within properties, you have an option of advanced system settings. So this is the option that you are looking for. Now do note that depending upon the Windows update that you have, the overall page that you will see will also differ. So let me quickly show you. In fact, in the earlier update of the Windows 10, the page would look something similar to this. So the advanced system setting was available here. However, in the newer update of Windows 10, the page is now a little different. So this is something that you need to know. Alright, so irrespective of the page, we are looking for an option of advanced system settings. Let's click here. And within here, you have an option of environment variables. And within environment variables as well, you have an option of path. So this is the specific one that we are looking for. Now, before we set the variable, let's quickly create a new folder. So you can select the location where the folders will be created. So let me create a folder called as binaries in C drive. Alright, so this is the folder, and what we'll do, we'll move this Terraform binary from desktop to this specific folder of C drive binaries. So basically what you can do, all the binaries that you have, it can be Terraform, it can be kubectl, vault, etc. You can store it in a single location called as binaries. Now from the environment variable in the path over here, let's click on edit, and here you can click on browse. Within here, under this PC, we'll go to C drive and we'll select the binaries folder over here and we'll click on OK. Alright, let's do an OK. So from a new command prompt, make sure that you have a new command prompt. Alright, so once you have set a new environment variable, the older command prompt will not really recognize it. So you'll have to relaunch the command prompt. So from this new command prompt, let's go to desktop again. Let's go to the KP Labs Terraform folder, and if you run the Terraform, you see it is working perfectly well. So irrespective of which directory you are in right now, it will not really matter. Terraform will work perfectly well. Great. So this is the high level overview about the installation process of Terraform for Windows. In the next video, we'll look into the installation process for different operating systems as well. Is based on Linux, and the exact operating system is Amazon Linux. So hi everyone and welcome back. Now in the earlier video, at a high level overview, we were discussing about the installation process of Terraform, and we had taken an example of Windows system. So in today's video, we'll go ahead and look into the overall process for Mac and Linux at a high level overview, and the practical implementation would be based on Linux. Now for both Mac and Linux, the process is very simple. You can go ahead and use the package manager based option, run the two commands, and that's about it. Terraform is up and running for you. Or if you do not want the package manager option, you can go ahead and download the binary as well, and you can use that binary. For Linux as well, depending upon the operating system, you have a set of commands, run those commands, or if you do not really want the commands, you can also look into the binary based download. So what we'll be doing in today's video, we'll take an example of a Linux based system, and we'll be exploring both the command based approach as well as the binary based approach, so that the overall understanding of the installation process is clear. So for today's video, I have a virtual machine created in AWS, and we'll be connecting to this virtual machine. So this is based on Linux, and the exact operating system is Amazon Linux. So we'll be connecting to this specific VM, and we'll look into how we can install Terraform through both of these approaches, and similar steps will be applicable for Mac. Only thing is the command would be different. Great. So let's connect. So from the CLI, let's quickly connect to the instance. And now let's go to the Amazon Linux here, and we'll run the set of commands. So I'll copy the first one. Let's clear the screen. I'll paste it here. Then you have the second command. And then you have the third command. Perfect. And the Terraform is installed. So now if you will run the Terraform over here, you will basically get the list of available commands in Terraform. So you'll see the overall installation process is very simple. Now let's also look into the binary based approach. Now before we look into the binary based approach, let's go ahead and remove the Terraform from here. Now before we do that, let's also run which Terraform over here to identify the exact directory in which the Terraform binary is stored, which is user bin Terraform. Great. So now let's go ahead and remove Terraform from this system. Alright, we'll have to run the sudo. Alright, so the Terraform is removed. So if you'll do a Terraform over here, this time you'll see it states no such file or directory. So in the binary based approach, let's go ahead and copy the latest link. Let's do a wget, and we'll get the latest zip file. So if you'll see, let me quickly show you. This is basically a compressed file. So you'll need to do a unzip on this specific zip file, And now if you'll do a ls here, you see you have a Terraform binary. So if you'll run the Terraform over here, as expected, we are seeing the list of available commands. So one more thing, if you go to a different directory, let me go to a different directory over here. And if you run Terraform from this directory, you see it does not run. So what you'll have to do, you'll need to set it to an appropriate path. So let's go back to the folder where the Terraform was downloaded, and we'll move this Terraform binary to user bin. And what you need to do, in case if you're not logged in as a root, you'll have to specify a sudo. And that's about it. Now if you go to any random directory and if you try to do a Terraform, you see things work perfectly well. Alright, so I hope with this you understood both the options associated with installing Terraform through package manager as well as through binary. Same thing you will need to do for Mac. You can either use package manager or you can use the binary. In case if you are using binary, as we are discussing, you will need to add it to an appropriate path like the user bin over here. Otherwise, in case if you switch to a different folder where the Terraform binary is not available, then you will not be able to run the Terraform. All right. Great. So that's the high level overview about the installation process of Terraform. So since now we have Terraform downloaded and up and running, from the next video things will get more exciting and we'll start to explore our journey into Terraform in great detail. Hi everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we are going to look into the right set of source code editor that you can use while writing code in Terraform. Now one important thing that needs to be noted is that the Terraform code that you will be writing, you can write it in any editor. In fact, you can even use Notepad and it will not really have any impact whatsoever. However, choosing a right set of code editor is important. For example, let's say that you use Notepad. Notepad comes with its own set of downsides. For example, it leads to slower development. It also has limited set of features. However, Notepad works as well if you'd like. So at a high level overview, whenever you start writing code, it can be Terraform, Python, Java, etc. You need a right set of source code editor. And there are many other applications that are available that provides much more better features that allows you to also code faster. Now, when it comes to the options that are available in the market, note that there are various popular source code editors that are extensively used, like Sublime, you have Visual Studio, you have Atom and others, and choosing the right one also is based on the individual preference. So let's quickly look into it. So for today's video, the first example of source code editor that we are going to make use of is Atom. Now, for example, let's say that you have a folder here called as SAM code, and within here, you see we have a simple Terraform code that is available. So in Atom, again, there are multiple features that are available. You have right set of coloring, you have dark mode, you can code in various set of languages, and it helps you quite a lot. You also have the line numbering and so on. So generally, these are all the basic set of features that you would see in any source code editor. If you'd like, you can also create a new file, create a new folder from the source code editor itself. You do not really need to go to your file explorer to do all of these. The second very popular option nowadays in the market is Visual Studio Code. Again, the basic set of features you will see quite common across all of the editors. For example, you have line numbering, you can go ahead and minimize a set of code. If you open up some codes like JSON, you have right set of coloring, indentation related information it will show and so on. Along with that, you can also go ahead and create a new file folder from the editor itself. You no longer have to go to the file explorer. Now, one important thing to note is that irrespective of what source code editor you choose, from Terraform side, there will be no impact. So you are free to choose the editor that you prefer. Now, looking into the editor that I generally prefer, I have been using Atom since past many years, and I feel the benefit of it is its simplistic design and basic set of features that are quite good enough as far my use cases are concerned. Now, one of the things that needs to be noted for Atom is that it is getting archived, so there will not be any new updates. So let's look into some of the alternatives that provides features that are much more better than Atom, and that is the source code editor that I'll be using in this course. So the primary editor that we will be using for this course is the Visual Studio Code. It provides much more better features when compared to Atom. and also great set of extensions. Some of the advantages of Visual Studio Code, first one is that it supports Windows, Mac and Linux. It supports wide variety of programming languages and it has wide set of extensions as well. So let's quickly look into it. Now, currently I am in the Visual Studio Code, and generally as we are discussing the basic set of features you will see common across all of the source code editors. The primary difference that you will generally see is related to the other feature sets and the extensions. For example, when we discuss about Visual Studio Code, it also comes with its support for terminal. For example, if I'll quickly split a terminal over here, so here you see, you can go ahead and run PowerShell. You can go ahead and create a new tab. You can also go ahead and open up command prompt over here. So within here, if I run various commands like dir, it works perfectly well. So in case if you'd like to code here and if you would like to perform testing within the same window, it is much more easier. Along with that, as we're discussing that the extension marketplace of Visual Studio Code is much more better. So you have extensions for various languages. You have Python, you have C, C++, JSON and various others. However, as far as Terraform course is concerned, we will refrain from using extensions since we are learning Terraform from scratch. Alright, so I hope with this at a high level overview you understood the basics of source code editor and the options that you can choose. Now again note that you can choose any other options. For example, you can choose Sublime, you can choose PyCharm and other options that are available. In fact, in one of the organizations that I was working with, we had ops team that were sitting right beside our security team, and ops team, you can say that they were like the Terraform pro guys. They used to write Terraform code entire day. Now among the team members as well, you will generally see that someone was using Sublime, someone was using Visual Studio, someone was using Atom and so on. So this is up to you. Now before we conclude, one thing to note is that for some of the videos in this course, you will see that I have been using Atom. However, for newer set of updates that we release in this course, I will be switching to Visual Studio Code. So that's the basics of it. And with this, we'll conclude today's video. Hi everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video, we are going to look into the installation and setup process for the Visual Studio Code. Now in Google, you can type the Visual Studio Code and this is where you will basically get the primary website over here. So let's go ahead and open this up. So as of now, the URL is code.visualstudio.com. So this is where you can go ahead and download for a specific platform. It is showing me Windows. You also have other platforms like you have Linux, you have Mac as well. So let me quickly go back and let's click on download for Windows. So this should go ahead and download the basic executable file. So let's quickly wait for the download to complete. Great, so our executable is downloaded. Let's quickly open this up. Now again, the installation process might differ in case if you are working with Mac OS, but the setup process will be similar. So first let's go ahead and complete the installation. Now within here, let me just select these two options. In case if you'd like desktop icon, you can also go ahead and use that. In fact, let me just select it for simplicity. I'll do a next and let's do an install. Great, so our installation is completed. You can launch the Visual Studio from here, but let me just deselect it and I'll click on finish. Now if I minimize it, you will see that I have a Visual Studio Code icon over here, or within the search, you can also type Visual Studio Code and open it from here. Let's open up the Visual Studio Code here. So this is how the primary window would look like. Now again, maybe let's say tomorrow Visual Studio launches a newer version. You might not really see this get started page. This does not really matter. The primary importance is how we can load a specific folder and start writing code through Visual Studio. Now in the earlier videos, we had created a folder called as kplabs-terraform. Now let's go inside this folder and let me quickly create a new file. Alright, I'll just call it as demo.txt. This is a simple text file, and let's say I'll say this is a sample file over here. Now, whenever you're working with the code editors, one of the primary thing is you'll have to add the project folder. So you can go ahead and open a folder. Let's click here. I'll select kplabs-terraform. I'll click on select folder here. And within here you see we have the KP Labs Terraform, and inside this we have the demo.txt. Now let's say you want to create one more file. You can go ahead and click on create new text file, create a new file, or you can also use a shortcut. Let's just call it as demo01.txt. I'll press enter and a new file gets created. Now if you look into the file explorer, you should see you have a demo01.txt. In case if you'd like, you can also go ahead and delete the file from the Visual Studio itself. You do not have to go to the file explorer for performing the task. In a similar way, let's say you are making use of Atom. In fact, let me also show you this so that we understand things at a high level overview. Even in Atom, one of the things that you will see, you have to add a folder. Let's add a folder. What is the folder that we want to add? It's KP Labs-Terraform. And here you see we have the demo.txt. In fact, let me just close the other tabs. We have a demo.txt, and in case if you'd like, you can create a file or you can go ahead and delete the file and so on. So at a high level overview, the basic features continues to remain the same. Now, in case in some of the videos, let's say I have created a new file through Atom. In Visual Studio, you can use the same approach to create a new file. So all of the basic features remains to be the same. Along with that, one thing that you will see is that you have the terminal support. So you can open up the terminal and you can run the basic set of commands from split terminal itself. One alternative way is you can open up the terminal in a separate window altogether, and from here you can run various commands. Now in this course, the preference that I have given is a separate terminal window. Primarily because although this also works, the split terminal also works, but from viewing point of view and maybe from debugging point of view, this is not the best approach that I generally find. It will work, but visually this is not as good. Great. So that's the high level overview about quick installation and setup for Visual Studio Code. Go ahead and set up the source code editor of your choice in your workstation so that from the next video onwards, we can start with our exciting journey with Terraform practicals. So with this, we'll conclude today's video. Hi everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video, we are going to discuss about the Visual Studio Code extensions. Now at a high level overview, the extensions are add-ons that allows you to customize your overall experience in Visual Studio by adding new features. Now extensions provides great benefits, for example, related to colors, related to auto completion of your code, related to report of the spelling errors within your code, etc. So generally, if you're working with Visual Studio Code, there are so many extensions that are available, and this is what makes it much more better. So they have extensions related to Python, C, C++, and various other languages that are available. Now, since this is a Terraform course, we are more interested whether the Terraform related extensions are available, and the answer is yes. Now, one quick difference that you will quickly note even from the screenshot. So on the left hand side, you have the screenshot associated with the Terraform code where the Terraform extension is not installed in Visual Studio. On the right hand side is the code after Terraform extension is installed. So from here you can see which one is easier to read, which one is more fun to read. Now if you look into the overall marketplace of Visual Studio over here, so this is the URL. Now in the extensions, if I'll quickly search for HashiCorp, you have the HashiCorp Terraform that is available officially from the HashiCorp. So this is the extension that you can make use of. Now let me also quickly show you on how you can install it. Now within the Visual Studio, I am in the KP Labs Terraform folder, as you can see. Now within this folder, let me just create a new file. I'll just call it as demo.tf, and I have a simple Terraform code that I'll add it over here. Now again, at this stage, we do not really need to know what a code does, but there are certain important differences that I wanted to show from the perspective of extensions. Now again, I'll be adding this code after this video in the next lecture so that you can easily reference it. Now this is the approach where extensions are not available. Now, if you want to quickly install the extension, what you can do, you can go to the extensions here and you can search for HashiCorp. You have the HashiCorp extension here that is available. Let me go ahead and install this. So it is currently installing and it is installed. Now, if you look into the demo.tf, you see the coloring aspects have been added and the code is now much more easier to read. Along with that, the Terraform extension also has great set of features that you can read from the extension page. However, we'll keep it simple as of now, and when we start coding with Terraform in great detail, that is when we'll go ahead and explore various features whenever required. So go ahead and install the Terraform extensions, and once you have tested it, you can go ahead and delete the file and keep this empty so that we can start with the practical videos from the upcoming section. So with this, we'll conclude today's video. Hey everyone and welcome back. Now, before we start with our interesting practicals on AWS, one of the first thing that is required is that we have to set up our own lab. And in setting up our own lab, the primary step is we need to create a new AWS account. Now, one of the very common question that generally comes is, do we have to pay for the AWS account that we create and the resources that we create in AWS account? And the answer is not really. AWS comes with a free tier benefits that allows customers to go ahead and use various services within limits. And if you're within limit, you do not really have to pay for it. So consider it more like a trial account for 1 year that you can make use of. So let's go ahead and quickly explore that, post which we'll be looking into how we can create our own AWS account. So currently I am in the AWS free tier page. Let's go a bit down, and one thing that you will see is that it is there for 12 months. So this is one important part to remember. Second thing is that this free tier offers certain benefits based on services. So for example, if you're using EC2 service, then AWS free tier supports 750 hours per month. So maybe if you run a server 24/7 for 1 month, it will be covered as part of free tier. And also note that when you hover over this, it gives you the exact details like 750 hours per month for Linux, RHEL or SLES T2 micro or T3 micro based instance. So for example, let's say that you have created a new EC2 instance of Windows. Now Windows is not really supported in this free tier, so immediately you'll be charged for that. So this is one important part that you need to note. So depending upon the services, there are certain limitations. For S3, they offer 5 GB of standard storage. If you go above 5 GB, then you'll have to pay. So this is something similar, and you'll see that there are a lot of services that are supported by the free tier account, and that is really great. Now for most of the services that we'll be using throughout the course, it would come under the free tier, so not much to worry about. Now within Google, when you type create a new AWS account, you'll basically get link to go ahead and do that. Let's go ahead and open up the link. So it takes us to free tier. At a later stage, it might take to a different page, but the primary aim is we have to look into how an account is created. So let's click on create a free account here. Now within here, you'll have to specify the email address and the account name. Now one important part to note, make sure that you enter the email address that you use regularly. I have seen people using a disposable email. This is like a big no-no. So since you will be attaching a debit card or a credit card to your AWS account, very important to use a personal email that you use regularly. So let's go ahead and add an email address. Let's add a password. And the AWS account name, you can give any name. I'll just call it as testing, and let's click on continue. All right, so it is asking us for verification. Let's quickly do that. Now the next important part is you have to select a personal or business. Overall, the services that will be available is the same. So let's go ahead and select personal. Now the next part and the important part is the full name, phone number, country, and basically it asks you for the address. So let me go ahead and fill in mine, and you can do it for your account as well. Now currently I am in Dubai for one of our projects, so I'll be using the country of United Arab Emirates. Address, let's fill in. Once you have filled in the details, you can just accept the terms and conditions, and let's continue to the next step. And in the next page, you'll have to basically specify the debit and the credit card information. Once done, you can click on verify and continue. Now again, one important part as also mentioned here, that although since you're using free tier, you will not be charged, but they'll have a temporary hold on 1 USD. So let's go ahead and click on verify and continue. And the next important part is you have to confirm your identity. So you'll have to specify the country or region code. Let me go ahead and use the UAE here. And basically they'll send an SMS. So let's go ahead and click on it. All right, so let's look into the verification code here. And yes, I have received a verification code. If you can see, I'm not sure if you can see it. So this is the SMS where the verification code has come. So let me go ahead and use that. And let's click on continue. And in the next step, you'll have to choose a support plan. Make sure you choose the basic one here and you can click on complete sign up. Perfect. So our account is now created. Now from the email address that you had entered, you'll receive an email basically stating welcome to Amazon Web Services. And it also states for next 12 months, you'll have free access to the core AWS services. Now, whenever you want to log into the AWS account, you have to open up the AWS Management Console. Now, since we have already created the account recently, it is giving us the link. Otherwise, at a later stage, if you want to open up the Management Console, you can type AWS Management Console within Google and you should basically see a page similar to that. Always make sure that you verify the URLs specifically whenever you're doing a search in Google. So your awsamazon.com, this seems to be good. Let's go ahead and sign into the console. And within here, there are two options, root user and the IAM user. We'll be logging in with the root user. So just specify the email address that you have used for creating the account. Let's do a next. Let's complete the verification and specify the password that you have created during the sign up process. And great, we are logged into our AWS account. So that's the high level overview on how you can create your own AWS account. Go ahead and do that, and post this, we'll start with our interesting practicals. Hi everyone and welcome back. Now in today's video we are going to discuss about the authentication and authorization stages. Now before you start to work and manage the environments through Terraform, the first primary area that you have to work on is related to the overall authentication and authorization. So let's quickly understand this with a small animation diagram where you have a Terraform that is installed in your local laptop and the provider where you want to create resource is AWS for an example. Now when Terraform tries to create a new server in AWS will immediately deny the request and it will ask Terraform to authenticate first. Now this is very similar to how you approach the console based way. For example, let's say you want to create a new server in AWS. What is the first step? First step is you log into the AWS environment using your credentials. And similarly, even for Terraform, when it wants to create resources in AWS or in fact any other provider, it needs to first authenticate to that specific provider. Alright, so with this, let's go ahead and understand more in detail about the authentication and authorization stage. The first area is authentication, and at an overview, authentication is the process of verifying who a user is. So depending upon the provider, the authentication credentials can be a username or password, it can be a token, etc. So once you provide the authentication credentials, the provider will verify whether the user exists or not. For example, let's say you try to log into AWS using a user of Alice. Whether user Alice is present or not is what the authentication stage really checks. The second stage is the authorization. Authorization stage is used to verify whether the user has access to or not. Now we can understand this with a simple example where Alice is a user in AWS but there is no access that is given to this user. Now depending upon the user, some user might have admin access, some user might have read-only access, some user might be present but without any access. So before we proceed, let's also quickly look into both of these stages. So currently I am in the AWS Management Console. Let's quickly go to IAM. So IAM is a service where you can go ahead and create new set of users in AWS environment. Now, whenever you create a new user in AWS, now again note this is just for a demo so that our concepts are better understood. Let's say I create a new user called as Alice. Now this Alice user, what type of permissions you want to assign? You want to assign an administrator access, or you want to assign a access to a specific service or a read-only access, etc. So all of this is part of authorization. So in Terraform, whenever you add the credentials for a specific user, you have to ensure that the user also has the relevant permissions to create resources in the appropriate environment. So the important learning for today's video is that Terraform will need access credentials with relevant permissions to create and manage the environment. So what you will do in Terraform, you'll also associate a set of username and password of the specific provider in which you want to create the resource. And once you add the username and password, Terraform will go ahead and authenticate through the provider, and after authorization, the relevant resources will be created. Alright, so this is the high level workflow. Now, one more important thing that you need to keep a note of is that depending upon the provider that you choose, the type of access credentials will also change. For example, if you are making use of a AWS provider, then in Terraform you might have to supply the access and secret keys. If you are making use of GitHub provider, then you might have to use tokens. For Kubernetes, maybe a kubeconfig file or a credentials config and so on. Now, if we look into Terraform, there are thousands of providers that are available. For example, you have a AWS provider to work with resources in AWS, Azure provider, GCP, Kubernetes, etc. So let's take an example of AWS provider here. So in here, if we look into the documentation, they have clearly stated under the authentication and configuration, they state what are the things that it needs to authenticate. So here it states access and secret keys. So access and secret keys you can easily get from AWS once you create a new user. Second example is of GitHub provider. Now, if you look into the documentation, let's go a bit down. In the authentication, what is required? It is asking for the token. So you can go ahead and easily create a new token through GitHub. Now, when we discuss about the authorization stages, most of the providers, they give great amount of flexibility related to what are the activities that a user can do. For example, in AWS, we saw that we can give a administrator access, read-only access, etc. Similarly, let's say tomorrow you want to work with GitHub. Now, you do not want to add the credentials of GitHub that can do all of the operations, including deleting all of your GitHub repositories. So depending upon what you want to create through Terraform, the credentials should have that amount of permissions only. So let's take one more example of GitHub this time. So in the GitHub page, let's quickly go to settings. Again, note that this is demo video. I just want to make sure that we understand things properly. Now, whenever you go ahead and create token, now we know that Terraform requires a token when it comes to GitHub. So whenever you go ahead and you create a new token, you can specify what are the permissions that a token has, whether it has permissions over all repository or only selected repository, and on that selected repository also you can specify for which feature what is the access pattern that it has. So discussion might have read and write access, the pulled request might have no access, and so on. So again, depending upon what you want to create and manage through Terraform, you can go ahead and create the appropriate credentials with proper permissions. So that's a very high level overview about the authentication and authorization stages, and with this we'll conclude today's video. Hi everyone and welcome back. Now in the earlier video we were discussing about the basics of authentication and authorization and why we also need to add credentials as part of Terraform for the operations to be performed on a specific provider. Now before we start with our exciting practicals related to creating servers and various others, it is important that we first generate the credentials. Now at this stage, I assume that everyone has created a new AWS account, and before we start to create basic resources through Terraform in AWS, we need to generate the credentials. Now for the AWS provider, the credentials are access keys and secret keys. Now in today's video, we are going to go ahead and generate these. Now from the AWS Management Console, you can go to a IAM service which allows us to create new users in AWS. Now one more thing to note is that AWS has recently introduced the dark mode. However, this dark mode is not available for all of the services. So sometimes you might see a dark page, sometimes you might see a light mode page. So this is a point to note. Anyways, so going to the IAM console, you can go to users, you can add a new user. In the username, I'll just say Terraform. Let's do a next. Now in the permissions, we are going to attach the administrator access permission. Alright, this is the simplistic one. Let's go a bit down. We'll click on next and we'll create a new user. Now once the user is created, you can click on the user. You can go to the security credentials and you can generate the access and secret keys from here. So let's go ahead and create a key. Within here, you can select the CLI option. Just select the checkbox, click on next and create the access and secret key. So you have the access key here, you have the secret key here. Go ahead and store these keys in your workstation because when we create the resources through Terraform, we will need these. So let's copy the access key. In my local environment, I just created a simple text file. I'll just say access key. This is the access key and secret key. Let's copy secret key. We'll add it over here. Alright. Now once you have generated the credentials for the AWS provider, now you can start writing the Terraform code to create certain resources, maybe a new server in AWS, etc. and start with our exciting practical journey. So go ahead and generate the credentials, and from the upcoming video onwards, we'll go in more detail and start with the practicals related to Terraform. So with this, we'll conclude today's video.